Welcome to the Pulling Each Other Along podcast, where we have the most wonderful guests in the world share their journeys of who and what pulled them along to their relative greatnesses in both business and life. Thanks for tuning in. The Pulling Each Other Along podcast starts right now. Hello, everyone. Again, this is the Pulling Each Other Along podcast. My name is Doug Cornfield, and I've been doing a series of podcasts today. It's been an interesting day. And as I've shared on almost every one of my podcasts, we get the greatest people in the world to come on our podcast. And I believe I got another one. Of course, I have to have another one. He is one of the greatest people in the world, Seth Silvers. And Seth, I just got to meet you today. It seems like you are doing some brilliant things in podcasting primarily. Am I correct?
Yep.
So let's just introduce yourself, tell people where you're from, and maybe tell people what you're passionate about. That's one of the questions I've been letting people lead with today.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the invite and getting to be here. Super excited about it. And like you said, it's been fun to get to spend this day with a bunch of different people and get to know more about your story and what you do as well. Like you said, my name is Seth Silvers. I own a podcasting agency. We're based out of Fort Collins, Colorado. And I've been doing it for about 8 years, but
Wow.
we've been focusing on podcasting for about 2.5. So I've probably had 3 different businesses in the last 8 years. I just haven't quit. I've just reiterated and changed under the same name.
Right.
But it hasn't by any means gone. The journey has not gone how I expected it to go.
It never does.
No, it doesn't. So, about 2.5 years ago, realized I was spread too thin, was trying to be all things to all people, and realized that for my passion for, storytelling and really authentic marketing and business, I felt podcasting was the best way to do that and the way that I could do that the best. So that was when we started focusing on that. And like I mentioned, I think one of the things I'm really passionate about is business done well. I've always been really, really inspired by businesses that are actually changing lives, where businesses are making a lot of money, but they're also making a lot of impact. And I think that's really necessary for our kind of society to go around, is to have impact-driven and profitable businesses. So that's something I get really excited
No,
about.
I love that, because that's part of a group that I'm trying to pull together and actually pulling together as we're starting to get members to join in our movement, doing a pivot of changes that we're doing to raise money for the sports camps that Dave Clark and Dave Stevens and I have been running now for years. And I want people in our group to be able to come in and not just get their logo on our T-shirt and get our logo on our sign. Because I for 6-7 years I've been telling people, I'd love to say you're going to get ROI for this, and I just straight up honest with them. I said, you're not. You're probably not going to get ROI for helping us with your dollars, to get on the marketing thing. And so I can only find people that were 100% good-hearted to write those. Whether it was a $100 check, $5,000, or $15,000 check, it had to be kind of a good-hearted person. And so that's where I was more apt to say, okay, what can we sell? What can we give service to? Dave's speaking events, all these kind of things, and that we've created my books, a whole line of products that I've created over the years. And now we're at that pivot change in podcasting is a big part of that pivot for us. And even on my last show, and I don't know when this will air and what directions I'll air, but Dr. Amanda, when I asked her what pulled her along, what her saying was?
What's that?
Podcasts. That was one of the main things that pulled her along. And I thought, well, that's really great, since we're at a podcast convention right now in a conference, and that's what you're doing. You're doing podcasts. Yeah. And so in this whole journey for you, what has pulled you along in this business?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I feel like there's probably never one answer. I think there's things that have pulled me along, and then there's an awareness of maybe where I've fallen short and not engaged in things that should be pulling me along. I think one of the biggest realizations I've had in my business journey is that I absolutely can't do it alone. And better than that I'm not designed to do it alone. That I was actually we weren't really created to be successful by ourselves. I really like trying to do things on my own. And so I'm great at, kind of inventiveness and starting things and getting things in motion. But so many times I've gotten my plate too full and said yes to too many things and I'm trying to do it all. And so then I end up just doing a crappy job at everything.
Right.
And so over the last couple of years, I've kind of like looked back and seen that a couple of different times in my journey. And at the place I'm at now, actually coming into 2023, in a men's small group I'm in, we were kind of encouraged to ask, like, what's one thing that you really want like more of in this next year? And for me, it was, I want to do more with other people, because I've realized over the last couple of years that the main thing that has pulled me along has been, mentors or colleagues in this space, and being willing to actually talk about what I'm going through with that. So I think my hardest moments have been when I'm trying to do it alone. And so when I look at the different times in my life, career-wise, but also personally, like in college, I was going through some hard things, and a pastor that I met, like that relationship for this 6-month window was so important to pulling me along. So for me, it's really been relationships. And when I haven't let those relationships pull me along, that's when I've fallen into the darker times and the harder times of my journey.
Can so relate to so many of those things, and it's funny. It's interesting you said that it was like a 6-month period relationship that helped pull you along, because sometimes it's not like for the rest of your life kind of stuff. It was just the right time when you needed it most. Somebody brought that wagon to pull you along, as our story goes. And sometimes it's just a moment. Sometimes it's 6 months. Sometimes it's maybe longer, these relationships and how we pull each other along. And I think that's really cool. And so you're about storytelling. I'm struggling where to go, because I got to hear your story earlier today, and I'm like, I could go this direction, I could go that direction. But obviously storytelling is a big part of what I have to do every day. I've got to tell our stories. I've got to tell the story again. Sometimes Dave Clark goes, I don't know how you do it. And I said, well, Dave, you remember when you wanted to play professional baseball? What did you do? You threw a knuckleball and you threw pitches up against the wall every day, over and over and over and over and over again. Changed your hand grip, changed your elbow, changed whatever. And you did it. And then you did it again. And then you did it again. And to me, that's a lot of what I have to do. I have to do the storytelling. I have to share the same stories, in some cases over and over, maybe a little differently, different audiences and what. So why is storytelling such a big part of your passion, and how are you going to manifest that?
Yeah, I'm as curious as any to see how that'll manifest. Because I think we were talking kind of before we hit record on just life looks different. Business looks different than I thought it would 8 years ago. Relationships do, and that's just part of life. It's not so true. It's just part of it. So I'm sure that it will look different in 5 years than I think it will.
It will.
But I think for me, it's always been really intriguing, partially because it's kind of like it's our language. Before we tend to think, there was always books around and stuff. Like books in their current reproducible form, I don't know, less than 1,000 years old.
Yeah. Wow.
And then, before that there was, parchment and writing on rocks and different things like that. But language and history and family lineage and stories, these were things that were passed down from generation to generation and told around a campfire. And they were told through stories. That was how I think history was passed down, was through parents telling their kids stories.
Right.
And so for me, I look at stories historically, and it's really interesting to me because it shows me that our brains are wired to receive information through stories better than just here's some data. That's why we don't really like bullet points in a presentation. And this is why I like Steve Jobs. He didn't do bullet points.
I 100% agree with this one.
He put like a word on there or a picture, and then he'd tell a story.
Totally agree with that.
So I think like we're designed to receive information well through stories.
Yeah.
So that's always been really intriguing to me. And that's why it's something that's passionate. And I think I think storytelling is a really good way to share value with other people and to share. I think it's really important that we don't just look at our story as, where'd you grow up and what was your challenge? Like everything you're interacting with every day becomes a story. A story is another way to talk about how we transmit information to other people. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's just always been intriguing to me. It's like people have been telling stories for thousands of years. We've been typing emails for, decades.
Since the 90s for me.
Yeah, we've been printing books for a couple hundred years, but we've been telling stories since that predates language, like written language, which
Right.
is really intriguing to me.
So you got to hear a story that I told, which is the whole premise of the Pulling Each Other Along podcast. And as you were hearing that story, how did that resonate? Even be, give me some analysis of the way I shared it. It was a group setting, wasn't a huge group, wasn't a public speaking thing, but it was 10, 12, 15 people tops. What were your thoughts when you heard the story of Dave Clark being pulled along?
Yeah, actually, so my favorite part of the story was actually you, when you mentioned that you were working on the book with Dave Clark, and then you got in touch with, is it Ernie?
Ernie Pound, yeah.
Ernie Pound, who was mentioned on page 22 or something.
Yeah.
And how you talked with him, and he remembered it, but again, it wasn't like similar how you said, like the pastor for me wasn't like a lifelong thing.
Right.
It's not like Ernie Pound continued to be his best friend and was continuing to.
They hadn't seen each other since first grade.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's a really important part of the story because that was unexpected. And I think when you look at storytelling, one of my favorite aspects of how to tell a good, memorable story is there has to be an unexpected piece. Our brains as humans we're always trying to process information in a predictable way. Like our brains they want safety. And so that's why we like routine generally. That's why we, eat at the same times, is because our brain and our body knows what to expect.
Gotcha.
So I think in storytelling, when you're sharing a story, I would have expected that they continue to be best friends.
Right.
But that's not what happened. And then, you had this memorable, so there's this open loop where it's like, wait, he didn't, they hadn't seen each other since first grade, but then you closed that loop when you said that, they got.
Well, I brought them together for that book signing.
Yeah, exactly. So I think
the emotions got lit. You can go watch that on our videos, and it's just it's amazing the emotion that got pulled out of that.
Yeah. So I love that was part of the story.
So I'll take it one step further, which is an incredible part of the story. So you had these two guys in first grade, very small town. Corny's only 10,000 people big. One left, goes to California, comes back, settles. I bring them back together. And then I found out that Dave Clark, of course, is a professional baseball player. And, that was his life career as being in professional baseball, even though it was on crutches with braces. And then Ernie Pound told me he was a professional pitcher.
That's wild.
Two little guys in this elementary school were paid to pitch. Now the kicker of this story, where it's going to be the sideline, is Ernie Pound is literally in the Hall of Fame for horseshoe throwing.
Huh.
He became a horseshoe thrower and got paid, and was like second in the world, I think, at one point in his level, and fifth in the world at these world competitions or whatever. But two very unique, took their own paths, came back together to both have gotten paid to pitch.
Wow. Yeah, that is wild. So yeah, I think I think when you're looking at storytelling, it's important to recognize what are the pieces that are going to be unexpected. That as a person's listening to the story and they're thinking, oh, I know what's going to happen next. Oh, I don't know what's going to happen next. You kind of want to break that a little bit, because then that causes somebody that's listening to stop and be like, what's going to happen next? I don't know. And I'm going to sit on the edge of my seat.
Right.
And so I think that's one thing that stuck out. But I think you've told the story a lot.
Yeah.
And I think you can do it really well. But that was one of the pieces where I was like, that's really cool, because that shows the butterfly effect, where is there something I did in first grade that had a lifelong impact
both negatively and positively? Because Dave can tell you the other side of the stories where he remembers the kids that bullied him.
Yeah.
And he remembers their names also.
Yeah.
And when we do, and we haven't done this for a while, but we're hoping to start. Actually, I have a speaking event on Tuesday at an elementary school. It's like one of my first live elementary school, since this whole COVID debacle. And, Dave would often talk about, I've got this one guy, Ernie Pound, and I've got this other classmate that I'm not going to mention his name, that one bullied me, one was kind to me. And we'll challenge the elementary kids, or even high school kids in some cases. Who do you want to be remembered like?
Yeah.
Because they're both remembered. Mm-hmm. Do you want to be remembered as that kid that did something kind? Or do you want to be remembered as that child that was bullying the kid with braces and crutches?
Yeah. Yeah, it's powerful. And I think so. That was one of the things that was sticking with me. Is thinking, man, I want to, even if it's never known, like recognize that the things that I'm doing today could have and probably will have much more of an impact than I could probably ever know.
Yeah. So you're doing the storytelling. And one of the things that I loved about what you said is you're like, I don't really know what I'm going to do. And I can relate to that as an entrepreneur. When I left the Merrill Lynch world and I'm saying, Dave, I want to do something with your story. I don't really know what it is. And then Dave and I meet and he goes, hey, I really want to do more sports camps for kids with disabilities. And I go, okay, I put this in a plan and I really have no idea. And I think, okay, I think I can sell I can make some children's books. I can do documentary, of course, the movie deal. We can do some speaking events and this and that. And the one thing that wasn't in my business plan, because I know, when you're talking about, you just don't know what's going to happen, was the sale of honey. Yet that became our biggest source of income for a long time.
Wow. Yeah.
Just because I took a mason jar and because we're from Corning and it's a glass town and I cut Dave's logos into that glass. And I found out, you know what? People love books and some people love T-shirts and some people love DVDs. Back then we were selling DVDs and hats and stuff. But you know what people really want? And they like honey.
Yeah.
And so we kind of made a whole business of selling honey to provide and keep our camps free for children that we serve. So it's not just honey, but you get the point. That wasn't in our business plan at all.
Yeah.
Wasn't in it at all. And so it sounds like you're in an exploratory mode with all of this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like I know for me, the next 3 to 5 years is laser focused for me on podcasting. I want to build one of the most trusted podcasting agencies in the country. I was saying one of the biggest, and then one of the most successful, and one of my friends said, what does that mean? And I was like, and we talked about it, and we kind of came up with, I want to be trusted. I want our clients to our clients to love the work that we do. I want our clients to multiply.
Right.
It doesn't have to be the biggest, but I want us to be one of the most trusted. Because that's a good indicator that we're putting quality into our work. So I do see in the next few years that a commitment to podcasting and really to content creation and using content creation to get valuable stories and to help grow valuable businesses. I'm laser focused on that. I think I've just realized that the path is I can plan for it, but there's going to be changes. There's going to be things that I can't control. There's going to be also the industry is going to change.
Right.
What makes sense for our clients 2 years from now is going to be different than it is now. So it's this weird balance where like I want to be driven and I want to be clear and I know where I want us to go. But there's also this understanding of we're going to get there differently than I have planned. And it's a lot better to kind of work with that ebb and flow than to like fight against it and just be stubborn because it's like, look, this was the plan we had. So it's kind of a weird balance.
That's really good. And it fits so much with our pivots and the things that we've had to do. And, and one of my favorite movies, and I don't know if we'll end with this, but it's one of my favorite movies is The Patriot with Mel Gibson, because he had this cozy life. Now he was widowed, so he had some struggles, but he had this cozy life. He had these kids that were well behaved, and he had his farm was going, and everything was rosy, and everything was great. And then boom. The Revolutionary War was brought to and his son was killed. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden he went from having this life to almost the next day, man, things were different.
Yeah.
And you keep those things in perspective on both sides, because when things are down, they're not as bad. And Billy Joel has a song. It's not, it's not as bad as it always seems. And it's not as good as it seems when you're having good. Right. And you got to keep that balance. And those pivots in our lives are just tremendously important. And I appreciate your wisdom at your age, knowing that, you're going to start going in directions, but then it's going to change. Yeah. Any last things? How do people find you? I'd like to go another 15 or 20 minutes with you, to be honest, but I know we're going to keep this short, because I'd like to pick your brain. What should we do with the Pulling Each Other Along podcast and get your thoughts? And hopefully we can do that after the mic, after recording stops.
Yeah, absolutely. The best place to find us is probably just on our website. It's successwithstories.com. That's kind of where you can get in touch with my team and with me. And I'm happy to talk with anybody about podcasting. We're usually working with businesses or organizations that are a little bit more established and they kind of know their identity, and they're usually not newer, but we also love helping newer podcasts or really anybody in the journey understand why I believe it's just one of the best tools to communicate stories. And that's why it excites me. So I'll probably be talking about podcasting for a long time.
Sounds good. Thanks for being on the Pulling Each Other Along podcast. It's been a pleasure to get to know another wonderful of the greatest people in the world. Thanks, Seth.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Pulling Each Other Along podcast. If you were inspired today, please share this episode and let us know in the comments section. Don't forget to thank and let those great people in your life know how they pulled you along.